He thought it was just another shift, just another day cleaning the floors no one else noticed, until one cruel dare put him in the spotlight. Cut to the janitor calmly speaking in perfect Spanish, then Latin, then Greek, jaws dropping. One moment of brilliance changes everything, but not everyone is happy. Suddenly, whispers turn to warnings. A scholarship for his daughter hangs in the balance, and someone will stop at nothing to silence him. What happens when speaking the truth threatens the future you've sacrificed everything for? And when the world tries to write you out of the story, will he find the courage to write the ending himself? Fade to black. A final echo of his voice. Translate this into love. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of Hawthorne Academy's Founders Hall, casting long shadows across the marble floor. Marcus Reed guided his mop in practiced strokes, the gentle swooshing sound mixing with the soft gospel hymn he hummed under his breath. The familiar melody of "His Eye is on the Sparrow" brought him comfort as he worked, just as it had during countless early mornings in these halls. Eleanor Bishop bustled through the entrance, her arms full of fresh flowers for the upcoming Founders' Day rehearsal. Her silver hair caught the morning light, and her warm smile brightened the space even more than the sun. "Good morning, Marcus," she called out cheerfully, setting her floral burden down on a nearby table. "These halls have never looked better, thanks to you." Marcus paused his work, offering a gentle smile. "Morning, Mrs. Bishop. Those flowers are beautiful. They'll really bring the ceremony to life." "Oh, please, it's Eleanor," she insisted, as she did every time they spoke. She began arranging stems in an elegant brass vase. "Will you be here for the rehearsal? I hear they're unveiling the new donor plaque today." "I'll be finishing up just as things get started," Marcus replied, wringing out his mop with careful attention. "Best to stay out of the way when the important folks arrive." Eleanor's eyes crinkled with disapproval. "Now, Marcus, you're as important as anyone else in this building." Before Marcus could respond, the hall began filling with activity. Staff members hurried about with clipboards and papers, while students in blazers and pressed khakis filtered in for the morning's rehearsal. The head of school strode through, nodding politely to both Marcus and Eleanor as he passed. Marcus moved his cleaning cart to the side, preparing to make a quiet exit. But the sharp voice of Cole Pritchard cut through the growing murmur of conversation. "Hey, better mop twice," Cole called out, his words carrying across the marble. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows between the buildings as Marcus climbed the narrow stairs to the apartment he shared with Jada above Wong's Corner Market. The sweet sound of violin music drifted down to meet him, Jada practicing her latest piece. The familiar melody warmed his heart, chasing away the lingering tension from the morning's events. As he reached their door, the music grew louder, clear and precise notes floating through the worn wood. He unlocked it quietly, not wanting to interrupt her practice. Jada stood by the living room window, her eyes closed in concentration as her bow danced across the strings. Sunlight caught the deep brown of her hair, reminding Marcus so much of her mother that his breath caught for a moment. She finished the phrase before lowering her violin, breaking into a wide smile. "Dad, you won't believe what's happening." Marcus set his lunch bag on the kitchen counter. "And what might that be?" Jada grabbed. Morning sunlight streamed through the small kitchen window of the Reed's apartment, catching dust motes in its golden beams. Marcus stood at the stove, carefully flipping pancakes while keeping an eye on the clock. The familiar sounds of Jada's morning routine echoed from down the hall, drawers opening and closing, the shuffle of papers being stuffed into her backpack. "Dad! Dad!" Jada burst into the kitchen, still buttoning her Hawthorne uniform blazer, her eyes bright with excitement. Her thick braids bounced as she practically danced across the linoleum floor. "You won't believe what Ms. Chen just texted me." Marcus turned down the heat under the pancakes. "Slow down, baby girl. Take a breath. The guidance office wants to see me first thing this morning." Jada pulled out her phone, reading the message aloud. "She says it's about the Hawthorne scholarship. Dad, they nominated me. The spatula nearly slipped from Marcus's hand. The Hawthorne Scholarship, full tuition to any college, awarded to one graduating senior each year. It was the kind of opportunity that could change everything. Marcus steadied himself against the counter, a mix of joy and caution washing over him. That's wonderful news, Jada. Can you believe it? Jada grabbed a pancake right off the plate, too excited to wait for syrup. Ms. Chen says my essay about Mom really stood out, and my grades, and the violin, everything. Marcus watched his daughter's face glow with hope, remembering how her mother had that same radiant smile. We should celebrate, he said, pulling out a chair. But remember, being nominated is just the first step. There's a whole process ahead. I know. Jada finally sat down, but her legs kept bouncing under the table. But Dad, even being considered, it means they see something in me. In us. Marcus reached across the table and squeezed her hand. They'd be blind not to see how special you are. He glanced at the clock. Now, eat up. Can't be late today. Of all days. Later that afternoon, as Marcus was checking the supply closets on the second floor, a crisp voice called out behind him. Mr. Reed? A moment? Dean Halstead stood in the hallway, impeccable in his tailored suit. His smile didn't quite reach his eyes. My office, please. Marcus followed the dean down the marble corridor, past oil paintings of stern-faced founders and gleaming trophy cases. The office was all dark wood and leather, designed to impress or intimidate. Please sit. Halstead settled behind his massive desk. First, let me congratulate you, in theory, about your daughter's nomination. Quite an achievement. Thank you, sir. Marcus kept his expression neutral, noting the careful phrasing. About your upcoming speech at Founders' Day. Halstead straightened a pen on his desk. We want to keep things appropriate. Uplifting, you understand. I believe I do, sir. Good. Halstead's fingers drummed once on his desk. We should avoid making it about, race or religion. No need to create controversy. Hawthorne has a certain image to maintain. The careful words hung in the air like smoke. Marcus felt their weight pressing against his chest. I understand the school's position, he said quietly. Excellent. Halstead's smile widened fraction. We wouldn't want anything to complicate matters, especially with the scholarship decisions pending. The threat was velvet-wrapped but unmistakable. Marcus stood, his dignity wrapped around him like armor. If that's all, sir? Yes. Thank you for understanding. That evening, Marcus sat in the back row of First Baptist Fellowship Hall. The day's tension still knotted in his shoulders. Most of the usual Bible study group had already left, but Pastor Ruth lingered, gathering up coffee cups and handouts. You're awfully quiet tonight, Marcus, she said, settling into the chair beside him. Want to talk about it? The whole story spilled out. Jada's nomination, Halstead's warnings, the choice pressing down on him. Pastor Ruth listened without interrupting, her warm brown eyes full of understanding. Sounds like someone's trying to put you in a box, she said finally. But maybe God's trying to get you out of one. What do you mean? Remember David? Everyone saw a shepherd boy, God saw a king. She patted his hand. Sometimes what looks like a trap is really a calling. The question is, who are you going to let define your purpose? Marcus let out a long breath. I just want to do right by Jada. And you think staying small makes you a better father? Pastor Ruth's voice was gentle but firm. That child needs to see her daddy stand tall, not bend low. Later that night, Marcus stood in Jada's doorway, watching her peaceful sleeping face in the dim light from the hall. Her college application essays were still spread across her desk, dreams spelled out in neat handwriting. The violin case stood ready for tomorrow's practice. He bowed his head, his prayer rising silent but urgent. Lord, give me wisdom. Show me how to be both brave and wise. Help me protect her future without sacrificing her legacy. Amen. Jada shifted in her sleep, murmuring something soft and unintelligible. Marcus watched her for a moment longer, his heart full of love and uncertainty, before quietly pulling her door closed. The autumn breeze rustled through the maple trees, lining Eleanor Bishop's street, as Marcus and Jada walked up the well-kept path to her front door. Red and orange leaves scattered across her small but meticulously maintained garden, where late-blooming mums added splashes of color. Eleanor opened the door before they could knock, her silver hair neatly styled and her warm smile brightening her face. "Right on time. Come in, come in." She ushered them into a living room filled with books and comfortable furniture that looked well loved. The scent of fresh-baked apple pie filled the house. Jada's eyes widened at the sight of delicate teacups arranged on a tray beside a steaming pot. "Those cups are beautiful, Mrs. Bishop." "Eleanor, please." She picked up one of the cups, its porcelain so thin it was almost translucent. "These were a wedding gift from my Henry. He knew how much I loved afternoon tea, even back then." Her fingers traced the gold rim with gentle fondness. 47 wonderful years together. Marcus settled into an armchair that seemed to embrace him. "How long has it been since he passed?" 5 years this December." Eleanor poured tea into each cup with practiced grace. "The first year was the hardest. But then I remembered what Henry always said, that grief is just love with nowhere to go. So I started volunteering more at Hawthorne, spreading that love around." Jada accepted her teacup carefully. "Did Mr. Bishop work at Hawthorne too?" "Oh yes, he taught chemistry for 30 years. Eleanor passed Marcus a generous slice of pie. "He used to say the school was like a second home, though I must say, it's changed quite a bit since then." Marcus took a bite of the pie, closing his eyes briefly at the perfect blend of tart apples and warm spices. "How so?" Eleanor settled back in her chair, balancing her teacup. "Well, for one thing, the scholarship program wasn't nearly as competitive. Henry and I always felt it should be about more than just grades. Character matters just as much." She gave Jada an encouraging smile. "That's why I was so pleased to hear about your nomination, dear." Jada set her cup down, her shoulders tensing slightly. "I'm worried about the essays. They want 3 of them, and the prompts are pretty intense. That's actually one reason I invited you both today." Eleanor reached for a folder on the side table. "I helped review scholarship applications for years before I retired. I'd be happy to work with you on those essays, if you'd like." Marcus watched his daughter's face light up. "Really? That would be amazing." "Of course." Eleanor's eyes crinkled warmly. "We could meet here every Saturday. I'll provide the tea and moral support. You bring your drafts and that wonderful determination of yours." As they talked, Eleanor shared stories about Hawthorne's past, the traditions that had endured, and the changes that had come with time. She told them about the year the great oak fell in the courtyard, and how the woodshop teacher had carved it into benches that still sat in the library. About the time Henry's chemistry class accidentally created foam that filled an entire hallway, and how the students had pitched in to clean it up, laughing the whole time. Marcus found himself relaxing more deeply into the conversation. Here, there was no need to carefully measure his words or maintain professional distance. Eleanor's home felt like a sanctuary where titles and positions fell away, leaving just people sharing stories and breaking bread together. The afternoon light was starting to fade when they finally stood to leave. Eleanor pressed a container of leftover pie into Marcus's hands. "For later," she insisted. "And Jada, bring those essay drafts next Saturday. We'll get started." The autumn air felt crisp and clean as Marcus and Jada walked home. Leaves crunched beneath their feet, and the setting sun painted the sky in shades of pink and gold. "I really like her," Jada said, breaking their comfortable silence. "She reminds me a little of Mom, the way she notices everything." Marcus squeezed her shoulder gently. "Your mother would be so proud of you, you know. Getting nominated for this scholarship, working so hard at your music." Jada was quiet for a moment, kicking at a pile of leaves. "Do you think I can really win it, the scholarship?" "I think you can do anything you set your mind to." Marcus looked at his daughter. No longer his little girl, but a young woman with dreams taking shape. "What would you want to study if you could choose anything?" I've been thinking about music therapy. Jada's voice grew more animated. Remember that program at the Children's Hospital where I volunteered last summer? The way those kids responded to music, how it helped them cope with pain and stress. The Monday morning sun streamed through the windows of Hawthorne Academy's West Wing, casting long shadows across the polished floors Marcus had cleaned before dawn. As he finished storing his cleaning supplies, a gentle knock echoed against the metal door of the janitor's closet. "Mr. Reed?" Lucia Alvarez stood in the doorway, her dark hair neatly pulled back, a warm smile lighting up her face. "Do you have a moment?" Marcus straightened up, wiping his hands on his uniform. "Of course, Ms. Alvarez. Please, call me Lucia." She stepped closer, her voice carrying a mix of enthusiasm and slight nervousness. "I was wondering if you might consider speaking to my advanced Spanish class today. My students are exploring the concept of living between languages, and after what happened with the plaque." She paused, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "Well, I think they could learn so much from your experience." Marcus hesitated for a moment, his natural modesty warring with the genuine invitation in her eyes. "I wouldn't want to disrupt your lesson plan." "On the contrary," Lucia assured him, "you would be enhancing it. Just 15 minutes is all I'm asking." Something in her earnest expression made it impossible to refuse. "What time is your class?" "Third period, at 10:30. Her smile widened. "Room 207. When Marcus arrived at her classroom later that morning, the students sat up straighter in their chairs. He recognized several faces from the hallways, kids who had started greeting him with newfound respect since the plaque incident. Lucia welcomed him warmly. "Class, Mr. Reed has graciously agreed to share some of his experiences with language and translation." Marcus moved to the front of the room, his usual quiet dignity somehow more pronounced in this academic setting. He looked out at the young faces, reminded of Jada's eager expression when she learned something new. "When I was about your age," he began, his voice soft but carrying clearly through the room, "my grandmother came to live with us. She spoke only Spanish, having lived her whole life in Puerto Rico." He smiled at the memory. "My mother worked long hours as a nurse, so it often fell to me to help Abuela navigate her new world." The students leaned forward, already caught up in his story. A girl in the front row had stopped taking notes, her pen hovering forgotten above her notebook. "One day, Abuela needed to see a doctor. I went with her, 12 years old and terrified of making a mistake." Marcus's hands moved expressively as he spoke. "The medical terms were complicated, but what I remember most was watching my grandmother's face. Every time I translated something correctly, her eyes would light up with such pride." A boy near the window raised his hand. "Were you scared?" "Scared, yes, but also determined." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "Language isn't just about words, it's about connection. When you help someone be understood, you're building a bridge between worlds." He shared how his grandmother had taught him old Spanish proverbs in return, writing them down phonetically in a little notebook he still kept. She'd say, "Marcos, cada idioma es una ventana nueva al mundo." Each language is a new window to the world. The students were completely silent, absorbed. Even the usual fidgeters sat still. The chapel's stained glass windows glowed like jewels in the evening light as Marcus slipped in through the side door, still wearing his Navy work uniform. His shoes, though cleaned, bore traces of gym floor wax, and his hands were slightly rough from hours of mopping. The familiar scent of pine cleaner clung faintly to his clothes. The historic chapel was already filled with excited chatter as students and faculty found their seats on the wooden pews. Paper programs rustled, and someone was tuning a guitar near the altar. Marcus paused in the shadows of the vestibule, taking in the scene before him. Eleanor Bishop spotted him first. She waved from her seat in the front row, patting the space beside her. As Marcus made his way forward, he noticed Lucia adjusting a microphone stand, her dark hair catching the warm light from the chandeliers. "You made it," Eleanor whispered as he sat down. Jada's been practicing all week for this. Marcus nodded, his throat tight with pride. His daughter stood near the altar with her violin case, talking quietly with other student performers. She wore the blue dress they'd found at the thrift store last month, the one that reminded him so much of her mother. The head of school stepped up to the microphone. "Welcome to Hawthorne Academy's first Unity Night," she announced, her voice warm and clear. "Tonight, our students will share music and words from their various cultural traditions." The first performance was a Korean folk song, sung by 3 students in perfect harmony. Next came a spirited rendition of Guantanamera that had several audience members swaying along. A sophomore recited a poem in Yoruba, then English, his voice strong and proud. Marcus watched it all with growing wonder. These were the same halls where, just weeks ago, he'd faced mockery and doubt. Now the air hummed with something different, something like hope. When Jada's turn came, she took her place beneath the carved wooden cross. Her violin tucked under her chin, she paused for a moment, then began to play. The opening notes of Amazing Grace filled the chapel, but she'd arranged it differently, weaving in fragments of spirituals and gospel rhythms that spoke of struggle and triumph. Marcus felt tears prick his eyes. He'd heard her practice this piece countless times in their small apartment, but here, in this space, it soared. The morning sun streamed through the library's tall windows, casting long shadows across the wooden tables where Eleanor sat waiting. Her silver hair caught the light as she sorted through a stack of papers with practiced precision. When Marcus entered to check the recycling bins, she beckoned him over with an excited wave. "Marcus, dear, I hope you don't mind, but I did a bit of digging." Eleanor's eyes sparkled as she held up a printed article. "I was curious after hearing you translate those languages so beautifully." Marcus approached slowly, his eyes fixed on the familiar. The clock on the wall ticked steadily as Marcus sat in the small meeting room, its sound seeming to grow louder with each passing second. The space felt tight, almost suffocating, with its windowless walls and harsh fluorescent lighting. Dean Halstead's polished mahogany desk dominated the room, creating an intentional barrier between them. "Thank you for coming on such short notice, Mr. Reed." Halstead adjusted his gold cufflinks, a habit Marcus had noticed whenever the dean was about to deliver uncomfortable news. "We need to discuss some concerns that have been brought to my attention." Marcus sat straight-backed in his chair, his work uniform crisp despite the long day of cleaning. "What kind of concerns, Dean Halstead?" "Well," Halstead cleared his throat, shuffling through some papers he didn't really need to look at. "Certain members of our donor community have expressed discomfort with some of the religious references you've been making during school events." The words hung in the air like heavy smoke. Marcus thought back to the Unity Night, remembering the warmth in the chapel, the way the community had come together. "I quoted scripture once, sir, alongside Langston Hughes. The context was entirely appropriate." "Be that as it may," Halstead continued, his voice maintaining its professional smoothness, "Hawthorne Academy needs to maintain a certain image. We're a secular institution, Mr. Reed. Some feel your upcoming Founders' Day speech might not align with our values." Marcus felt his throat tighten. "The speech I haven't given yet? Prevention is better than damage control." Halstead leaned forward, lowering his voice as if sharing a confidence. "Look, Marcus. May I call you Marcus? You're a valued member of our maintenance staff. Nobody questions your work ethic. But perhaps it would be best for everyone if you voluntarily declined the speaking invitation." The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Marcus processed the dean's words. "Everyone?" he asked quietly. Halstead's expression shifted, almost imperceptibly. "These things have a way of affecting multiple aspects of school life. Scholarships, for instance, require careful consideration of family fit within our community." The implied threat was clear as glass. Marcus thought of Jada, of her dreams, of the violin music that filled their small apartment with hope. His hands, resting on his knees, tightened slightly. "I understand you want what's best for your daughter," Halstead continued, his tone softening with practiced sympathy. "The Hawthorne Scholarship is quite competitive. It would be unfortunate if external factors complicated her chances. Marcus stood slowly, his dignity intact despite the weight pressing down on his shoulders. "Is there anything else, Dean Halstead?" The dean shook his head, already reaching for his phone. "That's all for now. I trust you'll make the right decision." Walking through the empty hallways afterward, Marcus's footsteps echoed against the marble floors he'd cleaned that morning. Each step felt heavier than the last. He passed the chapel where, just days ago, hope had seemed so tangible. Now, its stained glass windows looked dim in the fading afternoon light. At home that evening, Marcus tried to focus on preparing dinner, but his hands moved mechanically through the motions of chopping vegetables. Jada was in her room practicing violin, the sweet notes of Bach floating through their small apartment. The phone rang, and he answered it in the kitchen. "Marcus?" It was Eleanor, her voice tight with concern. "I just heard about the meeting. Are you all right?" He lowered his voice, aware of the thin walls. "I'm fine, Eleanor. Just processing." "This isn't right, Marcus. They can't." "They can," he interrupted gently. "We both know they can." The violin music stopped abruptly. In the sudden silence, Marcus heard soft footsteps in the hallway, then a quick retreat. His heart sank, knowing Jada had heard something in his tone. "I should go," he told Eleanor. "Thank you for calling." After hanging up, Marcus found himself sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the draft of his speech. The words he'd carefully chosen about dignity, service, and hope now seemed to mock him. In the golden light of their small kitchen lamp, he could see Jada's scholarship application on the counter where she'd left it for him to review. He picked up his pen, then set it down again. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, reminding him of that suffocating meeting room. From down the hall came the sound of Jada's door closing softly and the muffled beginning of her practicing again. But this time, the notes carried a tension they hadn't held before. Marcus spread his hands flat on the table, looking at the calluses earned from years of honest work. The same hands that had once written academic papers now cleaned floors and fixed leaky pipes. The same hands that had tended his wife in her final days now held his daughter's future in their grip. He glanced at his speech draft again. The words blurred slightly as he remembered the bright faces at Unity Night, the students who'd found courage in his example, Lucia's gentle encouragement, Eleanor's fierce support. Then he thought of Jada's dreams, of college applications and violin lessons and all the doors the Hawthorne Scholarship could open. The kitchen felt too small suddenly, too confined, like that windowless meeting room. Marcus sat perfectly still, caught between the courage to speak and the fear of consequences. His daughter's music filled the apartment with its bittersweet melody, a reminder of everything at stake. The morning sunlight filtered through the small window of the janitor's closet, casting a warm glow on the metal shelves lined with cleaning supplies. Marcus was organizing his cart when a gentle knock interrupted his routine. He turned to find Lucia standing in the doorway, her dark eyes bright with purpose. "Got a minute?" she asked, stepping carefully around a bucket. Marcus nodded, setting down the bottle of cleaner he'd been holding. "Of course. We're not letting this stand," Lucia said, pulling out a folder from her messenger bag. "The faculty, we're writing a letter of support for you. Eleanor helped us gather signatures last night." Marcus leaned against his cart, taken aback by this unexpected show of solidarity. "You don't have to do that." "Yes, we do." Lucia's voice was firm but gentle. "What happened in that review meeting wasn't right. We all know it." She opened the folder to show him several pages filled with signatures. "Look, even Mr. Chen from physics signed, and he hardly speaks to anyone." Marcus ran his finger along the names, recognizing teachers he passed in halls every day. Some he knew only by sight, others by brief morning greetings. Each signature felt like a hand reaching out. "This means a lot," he said quietly. "Your voice matters here," Lucia said. "The students need to hear what you have to say, and frankly, so do some of the adults." She smiled, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "Keep working on that speech. After she left, Marcus pulled out his notebook. The words came easier now, flowing from his pen with renewed purpose. Later that afternoon, Eleanor's living room was filled with the scent of chamomile tea and the sound of pencils scratching on paper. Jada sat at the coffee table, working on her scholarship essay while Eleanor looked on. "Read that last paragraph again," Eleanor encouraged, adjusting her reading glasses. Jada cleared her throat. "Music isn't just about playing the right notes. It's about finding your voice. My father taught me that through his actions, not his words. Every day, he shows me that true dignity comes from serving others with grace, even when they don't see your worth." Eleanor dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. "Oh, my dear. That's beautiful." Marcus, sitting quietly in the corner armchair with his speech notes, felt his chest tighten with pride and love for his daughter. "You think it's not too personal?" Jada asked, fidgeting with her pencil. "The best writing comes from the heart," Eleanor assured her. "And speaking of which," she turned to Marcus, "how's that speech coming along?" Marcus held up his notebook. "Getting there. Been thinking about what Pastor Ruth said, about translation being more than just words." The doorbell chimed, interrupting their discussion. Eleanor returned moments later with an official-looking envelope, her face glowing. "It's from the head of school." Marcus opened it with steady hands, reading aloud. "After careful consideration and in light of overwhelming faculty support, we are pleased to confirm your speaking role at the Founders' Day ceremony." Jada jumped up from her chair. "Dad, you did it." Eleanor clapped her hands together. "This calls for pie." An hour later, Marcus and Jada sat across from each other at their favorite diner downtown. The red vinyl booths were worn but comfortable, like old friends. Between them lay two things: a slice of apple pie and the Provisional Scholarship Award letter that had arrived that morning. "To my brilliant daughter," Marcus said, raising his coffee cup in a toast. Jada clinked her water glass against it, grinning. "To my brave dad." They each took a bite of pie, letting the sweet moment sink in. Through the diner window, the setting sun painted the sky in shades of hope. "You know what this means?" Jada asked, tapping the scholarship letter. "We did it. We really did it." Marcus watched his daughter's face, glowing with joy and possibility. The letter used words like provisional and contingent. But right now, none of that mattered. This was their moment, father and daughter, sharing pie and dreams. "We've still got work to do," he reminded her gently. "I know." Jada's voice was steady, confident. "But we're doing it together." Marcus reached across the table and squeezed her hand. In that touch was everything they'd been through: the late nights of homework and practice, the tight budgets, the dreams deferred but never abandoned. And now, finally, a door opening. Their waitress, Sandra, who'd known them for years, brought over a second slice of pie unasked. "On the house," she said with a wink. "Looks like you're celebrating something special." They savored every bite, talking about Jada's college plans and the upcoming ceremony. The scholarship letter sat between them, no longer just paper but a bridge to the future they'd worked so hard to build. "Dad," Jada said as they finished the last crumbs of pie, "I'm proud of you for not backing down." Marcus felt his eyes grow misty. "I'm proud of us both, baby girl. Your mama would be too." The diner's neon sign cast a warm glow through the window, mingling with the last rays of sunset. Father and daughter sat in comfortable silence, holding this moment of victory close to their hearts, knowing they'd earned every sweet bite of it. The moon cast long shadows through the chapel's stained glass windows as Marcus unlocked the heavy wooden doors. The day's earlier joy had faded into familiar weariness. He'd left his cleaning supplies after Unity Night, too caught up in the celebration to remember them. The chapel stood silent and reverent in the darkness. His footsteps echoed on the stone floor as he made his way to the supply closet near the altar. The space held a different kind of beauty at night, peaceful, almost sacred in its emptiness. He found his cart exactly where he'd left it, tucked away in the small closet. As he checked the supplies, making sure everything was accounted for. A sound from outside made him pause. Probably just the wind, he thought, but his heart quickened slightly. Marcus wheeled the cart toward the exit, taking care to be quiet out of habit and respect. He just reached the door when his badge caught on the cart's handle. The clip had gotten loose again. He removed it, meaning to fix it later, and set it on top of his supplies. The drive home was quiet, streets empty, except for the occasional late-night driver. Marcus's thoughts drifted to Jada's essay, to Lucia's kind eyes, to the speech he needed to finish. So much happening, so much at stake. The next morning arrived gray and damp, clouds hanging low over the city. Marcus pulled into his usual parking spot early, as he did every day. But something felt wrong. A campus security car sat idling near the chapel entrance, its lights casting red and blue reflections on the wet pavement. Dean Halstead stood at the chapel steps, his face grave. Beside him was Officer Chen from campus security, holding a clipboard. They both turned as Marcus approached. "Mr. Reed," Halstead said, his voice clipped. "Please come with us." Marcus followed them into the chapel and stopped short. His heart dropped to his stomach. The sacred space had been desecrated overnight. Crude slurs marred the walls in black spray paint. A bucket of dirty mop water had been dumped across the altar steps, leaving muddy streaks on the stone. Hymnals lay scattered and torn. This was discovered by the morning security patrol, Halstead said, watching Marcus's face carefully. Along with this, he held up an evidence bag containing a familiar object, Marcus's staff badge. "That's impossible," Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I was here last night, but I left around 10. Everything was fine." "Your badge was found right there." Officer Chen pointed to a spot near the vandalized altar. "Can you explain that?" Marcus's mind raced. "It must have fallen off my cart. The clip was loose. I remember taking it off to fix it." "Convenient," Halstead muttered. "Check the security cameras," Marcus said. "They'll show when I left." Officer Chen cleared his throat. "The system was down for maintenance last night. No footage." Marcus felt the walls closing in. This couldn't be happening. Not now. Not after everything. "I would never," he started. But Halstead cut him off. "Given the severity of this incident, we have no choice but to suspend you pending a full investigation." Halstead's tone was final. "Please surrender any school keys and leave campus immediately." Marcus's hands shook slightly as he removed his keys from his pocket. Each one represented a space he'd cared for, a responsibility he'd honored. He placed them in Officer Chen's outstretched hand. "What about my speech?" he asked quietly. "The ceremony? That's the least of your concerns right now," Halstead replied. "And I should mention, this incident will naturally affect any pending scholarship decisions." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. Jada's scholarship. All her dreams balanced on this moment. "Please," he said. "My daughter had nothing to do with this. The Hawthorne Scholarship requires exemplary character from the entire family," Halstead responded coldly. "We'll be reviewing everything in light of these events." Officer Chen at least had the decency to look uncomfortable. "I'll escort you to your car, Mr. Reed." The walk across campus felt endless. Students were starting to arrive, some stopping to stare and whisper. Marcus kept his eyes forward, his back straight, even as shame and anger burned in his chest. At his car, Officer Chen hesitated. "For what it's worth, this doesn't add up to me. You've been here, what, 12 years? 13. Marcus corrected quietly. 13 years of perfect service. No complaints? Then this? Chen shook his head. "We'll do a thorough investigation, Mr. Reed. That's a promise." Marcus nodded, unable to speak. He got into his car, watching in the rearview mirror as Chen walked away. The campus he'd called home for 13 years now felt alien and hostile. The drive home was a blur. Gray skies had turned to drizzle, matching his mood. At a red light, he pulled out the scholarship letter from his jacket pocket, the one they'd celebrated with pie just yesterday. The words, provisional, and contingent, now felt like nails in a coffin. His phone buzzed with text messages. Eleanor, Lucia, Pastor Ruth. He couldn't bring himself to read them yet. How would he tell Jada? How could he explain that her future might be derailed because someone had used his badge to frame him? The rain fell harder as Marcus parked outside their apartment. Water dripped from the building's old awning, creating a curtain he had to step through. Each drop felt like judgment, like tears he couldn't shed. He stood there for a moment, key in hand, looking up at their second-floor window. Jada would be at school by now, unaware that her world was about to change. The scholarship letter felt heavy in his pocket, its promise turning to ashes. With leaden feet, Marcus climbed the stairs to their empty apartment. The silence pressed in around him, broken only by the steady drum of rain against the windows. The squeak of Marcus's mop against the hardwood floor echoed through the empty gymnasium. Moonlight filtered through the high windows, casting long shadows across the court where he worked in slow, aimless circles. The familiar motion that usually brought him peace now felt hollow, mechanical. His badge was gone, his dignity questioned. And somewhere in the chapel, ugly words marred sacred space, words someone wanted the world to believe came from him. The mop made another loop, water spreading thin across the floor. Marcus hadn't bothered turning on the main lights. The emergency exits cast enough glow to work by. He preferred the darkness tonight. It matched his mood, the weight pressing down on his shoulders. He paused, leaning on the mop handle. The scholarship letter sat folded in his back pocket, burning like an accusation. All their hopes, Jada's dreams, balanced on the edge of ruin because someone needed him silenced. The thought of his daughter's face when he told her about the suspension still twisted in his gut. The side door creaked open, spilling warm light from the hallway. Pastor Ruth's familiar silhouette appeared, her practical shoes quiet on the glossy floor. "Thought I might find you here," she said softly, approaching with unhurried steps. "Eleanor called me." Marcus nodded but didn't speak, pushing the mop forward again. The water made soft, swishing sounds in the quiet. "You know," Pastor Ruth continued, settling onto the bottom row of bleachers, "when David faced Goliath, he didn't win by hiding in the shadows." "This isn't quite the same thing, Pastor," Marcus replied, his voice rough with fatigue. "Isn't it?" She clasped her hands in her lap. "A powerful force trying to make God's truth keepers small? Trying to silence what needs speaking?" Marcus stopped mopping, turning to face her. "I'm just trying to protect my daughter. By teaching her to bow to injustice?" The words landed like a gentle rebuke. Marcus closed his eyes briefly. "The truth needs a voice, Marcus," Pastor Ruth said. "Sometimes God chooses unlikely messengers, people who clean temples instead of preaching in them, people who speak through their actions as much as their words." The gym door opened again. Jada stood there, violin case clutched in one hand like a shield. She'd been practicing late at the music room, as she often did when troubled. Her eyes found Marcus in the dim light. "Dad?" Her voice wavered slightly. She crossed to him, footsteps echoing. "Why are you working? You're suspended." "Force of habit, baby girl." He tried to smile. "This floor won't mop itself." Jada set her violin case down carefully. "They're wrong about you. Everyone knows they're wrong." "Sometimes knowing isn't enough," Marcus said quietly. "Then we make them see." Jada's voice rose with sudden passion. "You taught me that hiding from bullies only makes them stronger. You taught me to stand up, to speak truth." She broke off, tears threatening. Pastor Ruth stood, moving to place a gentle hand on Jada's shoulder. "Your father taught you well, and now perhaps it's time for him to take his own lesson to heart." Marcus looked at his daughter, really looked at her. Past the hurt and anger in her eyes, he saw something else. Fierce pride. Not shame at her father, the janitor, but pride in her father, the man who'd faced mockery with dignity, who'd answered cruelty with grace, who'd taught her by example that true worth came from character, not position. He set the mop aside and opened his arms. Jada flew into them, burying her face in his work shirt the way she had as a little girl. "I'm sorry, baby," he murmured into her hair. "I got scared. Scared of losing everything we've worked for." "We haven't lost anything yet," Jada said, muffled against his chest. "And even if we did, we still have us. We still have truth." Pastor Ruth watched them with knowing eyes. "Sometimes God's greatest victories come disguised as defeats, Marcus. The question is, will you trust him enough to stand in your truth, whatever comes?" Marcus held his daughter close, feeling her strength flow into him. He thought of Eleanor's quiet support, of Lucia's gentle encouragement, of the students who'd found hope in his words. Something settled in his spirit, a calm certainty replacing the fear. "I won't give up," he said softly, but his voice carried in the empty gym. "I promise." Jada squeezed him tight, then stepped back, wiping her eyes. "Good, because I need my dad back. The real one, not this sad shadow hiding in the dark." Marcus actually chuckled at that, surprising himself. "When did you get so wise?" "I had a good teacher," she said simply. Pastor Ruth smiled. "Speaking of teaching, what do you say we all get out of this gym and go get some pie? I know a place that's still open." Marcus shook his head. "Let me put these supplies away first." He walked to the janitor's closet, every step feeling more purposeful than the aimless circles he'd been making before. The lock clicked with familiar finality as he secured the door. But tonight, the sound felt different, less like the routine end of a task and more like closing the door on doubt, on fear, on the temptation to shrink himself to make others comfortable. Morning sunlight streamed through the windows of Lucia's classroom, catching dust motes and golden beams. Marcus sat at one of the student desks, his work uniform crisp, despite everything. Eleanor perched on a chair nearby, her silver hair neatly pinned back, while two students, Sarah Chen from the computer club and Diego Martinez from the tech team, huddled around a laptop. Lucia paced at the front of the room, her heels clicking against the tile floor. "The main security system was down for maintenance that night," she explained, hands gesturing as she spoke. "But the IT department keeps a backup running on a separate network. For exactly this kind of situation," Sarah added, her fingers flying across the keyboard. The laptop screen cast a blue glow on her focused face. Marcus gripped the edge of his desk, trying to steady his racing heart. After days of feeling powerless, of watching his reputation crumble, here was a chance at truth. But the weight of what they might find, or might not find, pressed heavy on his chest. "Got it," Diego announced, turning the laptop so everyone could see. "Here's the chapel feed from that night." The footage was grainy but clear enough. The timestamp read 11:42 p.m. The chapel sat empty and dark, moonlight filtering through stained glass. For several moments, nothing moved. Then a figure appeared at the side door. Tall, athletic, moving with the confidence of someone who belonged there. Eleanor leaned forward, squinting at the screen. "Can you enhance that?" she asked. Sarah adjusted some settings, and the image sharpened. There was no mistaking the Letterman jacket or the familiar swagger. Cole Pritchard. Marcus felt his breath catch. Part of him had hoped desperately that there had been some mistake, that maybe someone had found his lost badge and used it without malice. But seeing Cole, the same boy who had mocked him, who had tried to humiliate him, it made a terrible kind of sense. They watched as Cole pulled something from his backpack. Paint cans. A crumpled badge that caught the moonlight. Marcus's badge. The video played on as Cole worked quickly, defacing the sacred space with hatred. "Stop," Lucia said softly when they'd seen enough. "We have what we need." Eleanor's face was pale but determined. "The question now is what we do with this information." Marcus stared at the frozen image on the screen, his mind whirling. He could end this now. Show the footage to administration, watch Cole face expulsion, clear his own name. The temptation burned hot in his chest. "We could take this straight to the head of school," Diego suggested, voicing what everyone was thinking. But Eleanor shook her head. Violence begets violence, she said. Even if it's just the violence of ruining a young man's life. He tried to ruin Marcus's life, Lucia pointed out, her voice tight with controlled anger. He deserves consequences. Yes, Eleanor agreed. But what kind? What serves justice and healing, not just punishment? Marcus thought of Jada, of the lessons he'd tried to teach her about dignity in the face of cruelty. He thought of his wife, who had always believed in grace even when it was hard. Mrs. Bishop is right, he said quietly. The others turned to look at him. We need truth, but we also need wisdom in how we use it. Lucia's expression softened. She moved closer to Marcus's desk, her hand coming to rest near his but not quite touching. What are you thinking? I'm thinking, Marcus said slowly, that this young man's actions came from somewhere, and if we don't address the root, nothing really changes. Eleanor smiled, the corners of her eyes crinkling. Restorative justice, she said. Not just punishment, but understanding and healing. Sarah and Diego exchanged glances. But how? Sarah asked. First, Marcus said, standing up, we need to save this evidence. He pulled a flash drive from his pocket, the same one he used to back up Jada's violin recordings, just in case we need it. Diego quickly transferred the video files. The small device felt impossibly heavy in Marcus's palm when he picked it up, the weight of truth, of choices yet to be made. We'll need to talk to Cole, Lucia said, and his father. Her voice hardened slightly at the mention of the elder Pritchard. Let me handle that part, Eleanor offered. I've known that family for years. They'll listen to me. Marcus slipped the flash drive into his pocket, feeling its presence like a burning coal. His heart thundered against his ribs. Fear and hope tangled together. They had the truth now. The question was, what would they do with it? Sarah began shutting down the laptop, while Diego gathered their things. The morning bell would ring soon, calling students to their first classes. Life would go on, but everything had changed. Thank you, Marcus said quietly to the room. All of you. Lucia touched his arm gently. We stand together, Marcus. That's what community means. Eleanor rose from her chair with grace, smoothing her skirt. Truth without love is brutality, she said. Love without truth is sentimentality. We need both. Marcus nodded, his hand pressing against his pocket where the flash drive sat. The weight of it anchored him to this moment, to this choice. They had found their truth. Now they would have to find their way forward. The grand auditorium of Hawthorne Academy buzzed with nervous energy. Morning light spilled through tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished wooden floor. Students filed in wearing their formal uniforms, blazers pressed, ties straight, shoes shined. Faculty members stood in clusters, speaking in hushed tones. Marcus Reed stood quietly in a side alcove, wearing a simple dark suit that Eleanor had insisted on lending him from her late husband's closet. His hands were steady as he adjusted his tie, though his heart thundered in his chest. Dean Halstead paced near the stage, checking his watch repeatedly. The head of school, Dr. Catherine Chen, sat in the front row next to several board members, her expression tense but determined. Cole's father, Richard Pritchard, occupied an aisle seat, his expensive suit and perfect posture radiating authority. Lucia approached Marcus, touching his arm gently. Are you sure about this? Marcus nodded. It's the only way forward. The hall fell silent as Marcus walked to the center of the stage. Instead of taking the podium, he moved a chair to the middle and sat down. His voice, when it came, was clear and carried to every corner of the room. Before any speeches today, I'd like to request something different. In my grandmother's church, when truth needed telling, we'd form a circle. I'm asking for that now, a circle of truth. Murmurs rippled through the audience. Dr. Chen stood and nodded slowly. Please proceed, Mr. Reed. Cole Pritchard, Marcus said quietly. Would you join me? Cole rose shakily from his seat, face pale. His father started to stand, but Eleanor Bishop's hand fell firmly on his shoulder. "Let him go," she whispered. As Cole walked to the stage, Marcus arranged a second chair facing his. The boy sat, hands clasped tightly in his lap, unable to meet Marcus's eyes. "Cole," Marcus said gently, "tell us what happened in the chapel that night." The silence stretched thin as glass. Cole's breath came in short bursts. Finally, he looked up, tears streaming down his face. "I did it," he choked out. "I vandalized the chapel. I wrote those horrible things and planted Mr. Reed's badge." A collective gasp swept through the room. Cole's shoulders shook as he continued. "But it wasn't just me." His voice cracked. "My father, he said we had to protect the school's reputation. He said Mr. Reed was causing trouble, making donors nervous. He told me to make the problem go away." Richard Pritchard shot to his feet. "That's enough." "No," Dr. Chen's voice cut through the chaos. "Let him finish." Cole wiped his eyes with his sleeve. "Dad's been pressuring the board about the scholarship too. He said someone like Jada shouldn't." He couldn't finish the sentence. Marcus leaned forward slightly. "Cole, look at me." The boy raised his head, meeting Marcus's steady gaze. "What you did caused real harm," Marcus said. "Not just to me, but to this whole community. To yourself, too." Cole nodded miserably. "But courage to tell the truth. That's the first step toward making things right." Marcus turned to address the entire hall. "I'm not here for vengeance. I'm here because this community needs healing. We need to see each other's humanity." Richard Pritchard's face had turned an alarming shade of red. "This is absurd. You can't possibly—" "Richard." Eleanor's voice rang out clear and sharp. "Sit down and listen to your son." Cole straightened in his chair. "I'm sorry, Mr. Reed. I'm so sorry for what I did to you and Jada. And I'm sorry I let my father convince me it was okay." He turned to face the audience. "I'm sorry to everyone. This isn't what Hawthorne should be." A quiet sob emerged from somewhere in the middle rows. Marcus noticed several students wiping their eyes. "I accept your apology, Cole," Marcus said, "and I forgive you." Dr. Chen stepped onto the stage. "Mr. Pritchard, in light of these revelations, the board will need to have several serious discussions. But right now, this is about healing." She turned to Marcus. "Mr. Reed, would you still share your prepared remarks with us?" Marcus stood, helping Cole to his feet. He squeezed the boy's shoulder gently. "Go sit with your mother," he said softly. Cole nodded and walked down the steps, passing his father without a glance. The podium waited at center stage, sunlight gleaming on its polished surface. Marcus moved toward it with measured steps, aware of hundreds of eyes following his movement. The room held its breath, waiting. He reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew his carefully written pages. The microphone hummed softly as he adjusted it. The auditorium was absolutely still, every person frozen in anticipation of his first words. Marcus walked to the podium with measured steps, his shoes making soft sounds against the wooden stage. The microphone picked up his quiet breathing as he adjusted it. The room fell completely silent, hundreds of eyes fixed upon him. He looked down at his notes, then folded them and slipped them into his pocket. When he spoke, his voice was clear and steady. "Veritas et labor vincunt," Marcus began, the Latin flowing naturally. "Truth and work conquer." These words have graced our school seal for over a century. He paused, letting the familiar motto sink in. But today, I'd like to share what these words mean when translated not just into English, but into life itself. His eyes found Jada in the front row, sitting between Eleanor and Lucia. She gave him a small nod, her eyes bright with pride. "When my wife Marie was diagnosed with cancer," Marcus continued, his voice softening, "I was working on my doctorate in linguistics. I spent my days studying how meaning moves between languages, how words bridge worlds." He took a breath. "But when she got sick, I learned about a different kind of translation, turning love into action. The auditorium was absolutely still. Even the usual shuffling of feet had ceased. Every night, I would change her hospital sheets, carefully lifting her tired body. The nurses taught me how to tuck the corners just right, how to make her comfortable. Some might have seen it as menial work, beneath a scholar. His eyes swept across the room. But in those moments, I was translating love into service, theory into practice, words into deeds. Several faces in the audience were already wet with tears. Eleanor dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. After Marie passed, I found myself here at Hawthorne, carrying my mop and bucket through these halls. Some saw just a janitor, but I was still a translator, turning chaos into order, dirt into cleanliness, disorder into harmony. He gestured to the gleaming floor of the auditorium. Every stroke of the mop was a letter in love's alphabet. Marcus's voice grew stronger. Last week, this chapel was defaced with words of hate. My badge was left behind, meant to mark me as something less than what I am. He looked directly at Cole, who sat with his head bowed. But hate is a poor translator. It mangles meaning. It twists truth. He straightened his shoulders. To the young man who did this, and to those who encouraged him, I forgive you. Not because what you did was right, but because forgiveness is another kind of translation. It turns injury into healing, fear into courage, division into unity. Sniffles echoed through the hall. Even Dean Halstead looked affected. His usual stern expression softened. Hawthorne Academy's motto speaks of truth and work conquering. But what do they conquer? Not people. They conquer ignorance, prejudice, and the artificial barriers we build between each other. Marcus's voice grew passionate but remained gentle. Every person in this room, student, teacher, staff, parent, is engaged in translation. We translate potential into achievement, dreams into reality, values into actions. He gripped the sides of the podium. My challenge to this community is simple. Let us become better translators. When we see someone mopping a floor, let us translate that into seeing dignity. When we hear an accent different from our own, let us translate that into curiosity rather than judgment. When we encounter difference, let us translate it into opportunity. The silence in the room had transformed from tense to electric. Every person seemed to be holding their breath. In my linguistics studies, I learned that the best translations don't just convert words, they convey spirit. So let us translate our school's motto into the spirit of true community. Let us translate our values not just into Latin, but into living. His voice filled with quiet authority. Let us translate our faith not just into prayers, but into practices. Let us translate our education not just into degrees, but into wisdom. Marcus stepped back slightly from the microphone. I stand before you not as a janitor who happens to know Latin, nor as a former scholar who happens to mop floors. I stand as both, and proudly so, because the highest translation of all is turning who we are into what others need. He looked out at the sea of faces one last time. Veritas et labor vincant. Truth and work conquer. May we be worthy translators of these words. The silence held for one breathless moment. Then applause erupted like thunder, rolling through the auditorium in waves. People rose to their feet, many openly weeping. Dr. Chen wiped tears from her cheeks, even as she clapped. Dean Halstead stood slowly, his face showing something like awe. Jada rushed onto the stage and threw her arms around her father. Marcus held her close as the music began to swell, the school orchestra playing the alma mater. Father and daughter stood embracing as the sound filled the hall, their tears mingling with their smiles. The grand hall buzzed with energy as people gathered in clusters, their voices a warm hum of conversation and emotion. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, casting long rectangles of light across the polished floor. Marcus stood near the edge of the stage, accepting handshakes and kind words from a steady stream of well-wishers. "That was beautiful, Mr. Reed," said a student with tears still fresh in her eyes. "I never knew about your wife." Marcus nodded gently, touched by her sincerity. "Thank you, Sarah." More people joined the line. Teachers, parents, even some of the kitchen staff who had slipped in during their break. Each person's words seemed to carry a different weight of meaning, from simple thanks to deeper appreciation. Cole's father stood awkwardly at the back of the hall, his usual confidence dimmed. When his eyes met Marcus's, he gave a slight nod before turning away. It was small, but it was something. The head of school, Dr. Patricia Chen, made her way to the podium, tapping the microphone twice. The crowd's attention shifted, though many still glanced Marcus's way with warm smiles. "Today marks more than just our annual celebration," Dr. Chen began, her voice carrying clear authority. "It marks a new chapter in Hawthorne's history." She pulled an envelope from her jacket. "I am pleased to announce the establishment of the Hands, Minds Fellowship, a program dedicated to supporting the professional development of our entire staff, from faculty to facilities." A ripple of applause moved through the room. Eleanor, standing near Marcus, dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. "Furthermore," Dr. Chen continued, "this fellowship will be overseen by our new Community Liaison for Inclusion service." She smiled directly at Marcus. "Mr. Reed has agreed to take on this role while continuing his vital work with our facilities team." The applause grew stronger. Lucia, who had been standing quietly nearby, beamed with pride. And finally, Dr. Chen held up another envelope. "It gives me great pleasure to announce that the Hawthorne Scholarship Committee has made its decision regarding Jada Reed's application." Marcus felt his heart skip. Jada, who had been sitting in the front row, straightened in her chair. "Miss Reed's scholarship has been made permanent, with full funding through graduation." Chen's smile widened. "And we look forward to her musical contribution at next month's spring concert." The hall erupted in cheers. Jada's friends surrounded her with hugs while she tried to wipe away tears. Marcus watched his daughter's joy, his own eyes growing moist. From the corner of his eye, he caught movement. Dean Halstead was making his way toward a side exit, his shoulders stiff. The dean paused briefly at the door, glancing back at the celebration, but couldn't quite meet anyone's gaze before slipping out. Eleanor appeared at Marcus's elbow, pressing a cup of punch into his hand. "Drink something," she insisted. "You've been standing here thanking people for an hour." Marcus accepted the cup gratefully. "I never expected all this." "Really?" Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "I did. The moment you translated that plaque, I knew something was going to change." She watched as Jada hugged Dr. Chen, the scholarship letter clutched in her hand. "You know what you did today? You showed everyone that dignity isn't about titles or positions. It's about how we treat each other, how we see each other." The reception continued to swirl around them. Teachers chatted with custodial staff like old friends. Students who had never noticed the cafeteria workers were now engaged in animated conversations with them. Even some of the older trustees, initially skeptical, were nodding along as Lucia explained her vision for expanding language programs to include staff education. Pastor Ruth stopped by, her kind face glowing. "Your wife would be so proud," she said softly, squeezing Marcus's hand before moving on. A group of students approached, asking if Marcus would help start a multilingual service club. He listened to their eager plans, noting how they included ideas for working with the maintenance and kitchen staff to learn practical vocabulary in different languages. Through it all, Marcus kept finding his gaze drawn to Jada. She moved through the crowd with grace, her scholarship letter safely tucked away, stopping to thank people who had supported them. She seemed taller somehow, more assured, as if the weight of uncertainty had finally lifted from her shoulders. Eleanor touched Marcus's arm gently, her voice dropping to a whisper. "You've changed this place," she said, eyes twinkling with satisfaction and unshed tears. And it was long overdue. The words hung in the air between them, simple but profound, as the celebration continued to flow around them like a river of hope and new beginnings. The morning sun hadn't yet reached the windows of Hawthorne Academy's grand hall when Marcus pulled his cleaning cart through the double doors. Though he no longer had to clean this space, his new role as community liaison kept him busy enough. He chose to maintain this particular morning ritual. The quiet moments with his mop gave him time to think. Steam rose from the travel mug of coffee on his cart, a gift from Eleanor, who insisted he upgrade from those paper cups. The familiar scent of lemon, fresh cleaner filled the air as he dipped his mop into the bucket. His phone buzzed. A text from Lucia. "Still on for coffee at 4? Found this great little place downtown." Marcus smiled, typing back a quick, "Looking forward to it." His hands were steadier now, when messaging her, though his heart still did a little jump at the sight of her name. The sound of footsteps echoed from the hallway. Cole Pritchard appeared in the doorway, wearing jeans instead of his usual pressed khakis. The boy hesitated before entering. "Good morning, Mr. Reed," Cole said, his voice carrying none of its former swagger. "I'm here for my first day." Marcus nodded, gesturing to a second mop leaning against the wall. "Start at the far end, work toward the middle. I'll show you the proper technique." Cole grabbed the mop, his movements uncertain. Marcus demonstrated the figure-8 pattern he'd perfected over years of practice. "Like this," he said. "Steady pressure, but not too hard. Let the mop do the work." They worked in silence for a while, the swish-swish of their mops creating a peaceful rhythm. Finally, Cole spoke. "Mr. Reed, I've been thinking about what you said in your speech, about translation and actions." Marcus paused, giving the boy his full attention. "I want to actually learn Spanish," Cole continued. "Not just to pass Ms. Alvarez's class, but really learn it. My grandmother, my dad never talks about her, but she was from Mexico. I thought maybe." "That's a good place to start," Marcus said softly. "Ms. Alvarez has excellent study groups after school." The morning light began creeping across the floor, creating golden patches that their mops carefully navigated around. From somewhere down the hall came the sound of violin music. Jada practicing for her upcoming scholarship concert. The melody floated through the space, making even the task of mopping feel somehow graceful. Eleanor poked her head in around 9, clutching a stack of sheet music. "There you are. Jada wanted me to remind you about dress rehearsal tonight." She smiled warmly at Cole. "And how are you finding the zen of mopping, young man?" Cole looked up, managing a small smile. "It's actually kind of peaceful, Mrs. Bishop." "Isn't it, though?" She winked at Marcus. "Though I suspect some find more peace in it than others." After Eleanor left, Marcus checked his watch. He had a meeting with the head of school about expanding the Hands Minds Fellowship, followed by lunch with the facilities staff to hear their ideas for improving campus accessibility. "That's enough for today," he told Cole. "Same time Thursday?" Cole nodded, carefully returning his mop to the cleaning cart. He paused at the door. "Thanks, Mr. Reed, for, giving me a chance." Marcus watched him go, remembering his own moments of redemption over the years. Sometimes the hardest translations were from who we were to who we could become. The rest of the day passed in a blur of meetings and conversations. Before he knew it, it was nearly 4 o'clock. Marcus changed into the fresh shirt he'd brought, a deep blue one Jada had helped him pick out. "Dad, you can't wear your work clothes on a coffee date," she'd insisted. He found Lucia waiting outside the small cafe she'd chosen, a book tucked under her arm. Her face lit up when she saw him, and that simple gesture made his heart warm. "I hope you don't mind," she said, "but I brought some poetry I thought you might enjoy. It's Pablo Neruda, beautiful in both Spanish and English." They found a quiet table by the window. As they talked about languages, literature, and life, Marcus felt the last walls around his heart beginning to soften. When Lucia laughed at one of his gentle jokes, the sound was like music. Later that evening, Marcus returned to the grand hall to help Jada set up for her rehearsal. She was already there, carefully tuning her violin. The setting sun filtered through the stained glass windows, painting the space in jewel tones of ruby, sapphire, and amber. "How was coffee with Miss Alvarez?" Jada asked, a knowing smile playing at her lips. Marcus felt his cheeks warm. "It was nice." "Just nice?" Jada teased, adjusting her sheet music. "Is that why you're still smiling?" Before Marcus could respond, Eleanor arrived with the accompanist. Soon the hall filled with the soaring notes of Jada's violin, each phrase rising toward the vaulted ceiling like a prayer. Marcus stood in the back, watching his daughter play. The light through the stained glass seemed to dance with her music, creating patterns that shifted and flowed across the floor he'd cleaned that morning. In that moment, everything, the struggles, the victories, the daily acts of service, the new beginnings, felt perfectly translated into something beautiful and true. The sunlight caught the brass nameplate on his new office door. Marcus Reed, Community Liaison for Inclusion Service. But it was the smaller sign below, the one he'd added himself, that meant more. All are welcome here, in English, Spanish, Greek, and ASL. He remembered his wife's favorite saying, "Love speaks every language." As he watched the colored light play across the floor and listened to his daughter's music fill the space, Marcus knew that some translations needed no words at all. Morning light streamed through the apartment windows as Jada stood in front of her music stand, drawing her bow across the violin strings. The melody of Bach's air floated through their small living room, each note clear and precise. Marcus watched from the doorway, holding her navy blue hair ribbon. "Just a tiny bit sharp on that high G," he said gently. Jada nodded, adjusting her finger position without breaking rhythm. Her new concert dress, borrowed from the school's performing arts department, swished as she swayed with the music. The deep blue fabric matched the ribbon Marcus held. When she finished the piece, she lowered her violin and turned to him with a small smile. "How was that?" "Beautiful," Marcus said, stepping forward. "Now let's fix this hair before Eleanor arrives." Jada sat on the edge of their worn armchair, while Marcus gathered her thick curls. His fingers moved with practiced grace, smoothing and arranging her hair just the way she liked it. Years of being both father and mother had taught him these small but important skills. "Nervous?" he asked, carefully tying the ribbon. "A little," Jada admitted. "It's my first performance as a Hawthorne scholar." Marcus's hands stilled for a moment on her shoulders. "You earned this, sweetheart. Every note, every hour of practice, it all matters." A gentle knock at the door announced Eleanor's arrival. She bustled in, carrying an armful of yellow roses, her silver hair neatly styled and her eyes bright with excitement. "There's my star performer," Eleanor exclaimed, setting the flowers on their kitchen table. "And look at you, Marcus. That new blazer suits you perfectly." Marcus smoothed the front of his navy jacket, still not quite used to wearing business attire instead of his custodial uniform. The brass name tag reading Community Liaison caught the morning light. "Ready to head over?" Eleanor asked, selecting one perfect yellow rose from the bouquet. "This is for your hair, dear," she said to Jada, carefully tucking the bloom into the ribbon Marcus had tied. They gathered their things, Jada's violin case, Marcus's leather portfolio, another gift from Eleanor, and the remaining flowers. The walk to Hawthorne took them past the small shops, just waking up for the day. The bakery owner waved through his window, and the newsstand vendor called out a cheerful good morning. At the school gates, Marcus felt the familiar flutter in his chest. Not anxiety anymore, but a quiet joy. Students nodded and smiled as they passed. A group of freshman girls waved enthusiastically at Jada, who blushed and waved back. Inside, the halls hummed with morning activity. Marcus greeted the custodial staff by name, sharing quick conversations about family and weekend plans. He'd made sure his new position didn't distance him from his former colleagues. "Good morning, Mr. Reed," called Ms. Chen from the math department. "We're still on for that tutoring program meeting at lunch?" "Wouldn't miss it," Marcus replied. The new initiative would pair honor students with kids struggling in their studies. Exactly the kind of bridge-building work he'd hoped to do. They passed Dean Halstead's old office, now occupied by the much warmer presence of Dr. Martinez. The new dean stepped out to shake Marcus's hand and wish Jada luck. Lucia appeared around the corner, her arms full of Spanish textbooks. Her eyes met Marcus's with that special warmth that still made his heart skip. Their coffee date had led to dinner, which had led to long walks and longer conversations. They were taking things slow, but the possibility of more hung sweet in the air between them. "Save me a seat?" she asked softly. "Front row," Marcus promised. They reached the auditorium's backstage entrance. Other students were already warming up, the discordant sound of instruments being tuned filling the air. Jada's hands tightened on her violin case. Eleanor pulled her into a quick hug. "You'll be magnificent, dear. We'll be right there watching." Marcus helped Jada unpack her violin, checking that her sheet music was properly arranged on the stand. She ran her fingers over the strings, plucking them gently to check the pitch. Her hands trembled slightly. "Dad," she whispered. "Right here, baby. Thank you for everything." Marcus straightened her ribbon one last time, his throat tight with emotion. "You make it all worth it." Jada lifted her violin to her shoulder, drew a deep breath, and began her warm-up scales. The familiar routine seemed to steady her, though Marcus could see the nervous energy in her posture as she focused on tuning each string to perfection. The Hawthorne Academy auditorium buzzed with excitement as families filed in, filling every available seat. Programs rustled, and whispered conversations echoed off the high ceiling. The grand space, with its ornate moldings and rich burgundy curtains, had never felt more alive. Marcus sat in the third row, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. Lucia settled into the seat beside him, her shoulder brushing his. Eleanor sat on his other side, already dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, though the concert hadn't even begun. "She's going to be wonderful," Lucia whispered, her warm breath tickling his ear. The lights dimmed, and the audience fell silent. The head of school stepped onto the stage, her heels clicking against the polished wood. "Welcome to our spring scholarship concert," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the space. "Tonight represents the culmination of extraordinary talent and dedication from our students." The first performer was a pianist, a sophomore who played Chopin with careful precision. Then came a cellist, whose rich tones filled the hall with Dvorak. Marcus watched each performance, but his thoughts kept drifting to backstage, where Jada waited. When it was finally Jada's turn, Marcus sat up straighter. The spotlight caught her as she walked center stage, violin tucked under her arm. Her blue dress sparkled subtly, and the matching ribbon in her hair caught the light. She looked poised, confident, so grown up that Marcus's heart squeezed in his chest. Jada lifted her violin to her shoulder and took a deep breath. The first notes of Bach's air floated out over the audience, pure and sweet. Marcus found himself holding his breath. Every phrase was perfect, each note ringing true and clear. The melody soared and dipped, telling a story of longing and hope. Marcus remembered the countless hours of practice, the way Jada would play the same passage over and over until it was just right. He thought of her mother, who had first placed a tiny violin in their daughter's hands. Tears pricked at his eyes as the music swelled. Lucia's hand found his in the darkness, her fingers intertwining with his. The simple gesture anchored him, and he squeezed back gently. Eleanor sniffled quietly on his other side. The piece built to its climax, Jada's bow dancing across the strings with graceful confidence. As the final notes faded away, there was a moment of complete silence. Then the audience erupted in applause. People began standing, row by row, until the entire auditorium was on their feet. Marcus couldn't stop smiling, his chest so full it felt like it might burst. Jada beamed under the spotlight, her eyes finding his in the crowd. She dipped into a small curtsy, just as they had practiced at home. As she left the stage, the applause continued. The next student had to wait several moments before beginning their piece. Lucia's hand remained in Marcus's, her thumb tracing small circles on his skin. When the concert ended, The audience filed into the lobby for refreshments, but Marcus made his way backstage. He found Jada in the green room, carefully placing her violin in its case. When she saw him, she launched herself into his arms. "Dad!" she cried, hugging him fiercely. Marcus held her tight, breathing in the familiar scent of her shampoo and violin rosin. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of Hawthorne Academy's conference room, casting warm patches of light across the circle of chairs Marcus had carefully arranged. He adjusted the last seat, making sure the spacing felt welcoming rather than formal. On a side table, Eleanor's homemade muffins sat next to coffee and tea, their cinnamon scent filling the air. Marcus checked his watch. 7:45 a.m. In 15 minutes, the first ever staff development workshop funded by the Hands, Minds Fellowship would begin. His stomach fluttered with nervous excitement. Rosa, who had worked in the cafeteria for 20 years, was the first to arrive. She carried herself differently now, head held high as she chose a seat. "Good morning, Mr. Reed," she said warmly, the formal title still feeling strange between them after years of first-name basis. "Please, Rosa, just Marcus," he replied with a gentle smile. "We're all equals here." More staff members trickled in. Jim from the night cleaning crew, still in his work clothes from the overnight shift. 3 teachers from the English department, chatting with Maria who managed the salad bar. Mr. Chen, the chemistry teacher, deep in conversation with Carlos, the groundskeeper, about organic fertilizers. When the room was full, Marcus cleared his throat. The conversations quieted naturally, faces turning toward him with expectation and trust. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice steady and warm. "This fellowship was created to recognize that every person who works at Hawthorne contributes to our students' education. Today, we're here to learn from each other." He gestured to the circle of chairs. "Notice how we're seated. No head of the table, no back row. Just a circle of colleagues sharing wisdom." Marcus pulled out a small leather-bound notebook, the same one where he drafted his Founders' Day speech. "I'd like to start by sharing a story about my first day here, 8 years ago." He described arriving early, nervous about his new job, and finding comfort in the friendship of Bill, the retiring janitor who showed him the ropes. "Bill taught me something I've never forgotten," he said. "Marcus, these kids might not remember every lesson from their textbooks, but they'll remember how we made them feel welcome, safe, and respected in these halls." Heads nodded around the circle. Rosa raised her hand tentatively. When Marcus acknowledged her, she sat straighter in her chair. "The children who come early for breakfast," she said, her voice growing stronger. "Some of them are so hungry. Not just for food. They're hungry for someone to see them, to say good morning and mean it. So I learn their names, their favorite cereals. When they graduate, they come back to visit the cafeteria first, before their old teachers." Chuckles rippled through the room, but they were warm, understanding laughs. Marcus noticed several teachers taking notes. Jim spoke next, his usual shyness falling away as he described the notes of encouragement he found left by students, thanking him for keeping their classrooms clean and healthy. "One girl wrote that seeing me work hard every night inspired her to study harder," he said, voice thick with emotion. "I kept that note." The stories flowed naturally after that. Maria shared how she helped a homesick international student by learning to make his favorite dish from home. Carlos spoke about teaching interested students about the native plants he tended in the school garden. A math teacher admitted she'd learned more about connecting with struggling students from watching the cafeteria staff than from any teaching seminar. Eleanor, who had slipped in quietly during the sharing, raised her hand. "When I was librarian here," she said, "Marcus would often help me reshelve books late in the day. But he didn't just push the cart. He remembered which students were working on which projects and would set aside resources for them. That's teaching, plain and simple." Marcus felt his cheeks warm at the praise, but he let it stand. This wasn't about him. It was about recognizing the web of care and intelligence that made a school truly work. They broke into smaller groups, mapping out ways to better support each other and their students. The chemistry teacher and cafeteria staff planned a unit on nutrition science. The groundskeeper and biology department sketched ideas for an outdoor classroom. The night crew and art teachers discussed displaying student work in ways that made evening cleaning easier. As the workshop wound down, Marcus noticed something remarkable. No one was checking the time. The usual barriers between staff roles had softened, replaced by genuine collaboration and respect. "Before we finish," Marcus said, "I want us to remember something. Every job in this school is a teaching job. Every one of us shows students what it means to work with dignity, to treat others with kindness, to do our best even when no one's watching." He looked around the circle, meeting each person's eyes. "Thank you for being here, for sharing your wisdom, for helping make Hawthorne a place where everyone can learn and grow." The room burst into spontaneous applause. People lingered afterward, exchanging contact information and continuing conversations. Rosa hugged Marcus, whispering, "Thank you for helping us find our voices." As the last participants filed out, Marcus began gathering empty coffee cups and straightening chairs. The morning light had shifted, painting the room in warm gold. He could still feel the energy of the gathering, the invisible bonds that had formed and strengthened. Walking to the supply closet for a recycling bag, Marcus heard footsteps. Jim had stayed behind to help clean up. "Leave it, Marcus," Jim said with a grin. "That's my job now. You've got other work to do." Marcus smiled and handed over the cups he'd collected. Together they did a final check of the room. Jim headed off with the recycling, while Marcus took one last look around the space where so many barriers had come down that morning. With a contented sigh, Marcus pulled out his keys. The lock clicked shut with a satisfying finality, but his heart felt more open than ever. The bell above Main Street Cafe's door chimed softly as Marcus stepped inside, the warm scent of coffee and fresh-baked pastries washing over him. His eyes adjusted to the cozy lighting, scanning past the morning regulars until he spotted Lucia at a corner table near the window. She wore a deep blue sweater and was reading a small book, her dark hair falling forward as she leaned over the pages. His heart did a little skip when she looked up and smiled, marking her place with a worn bookmark. Marcus made his way through the scattered tables, suddenly aware of his casual Saturday clothes, a soft gray sweater Jada had given him last Christmas, and his most comfortable jeans. "I hope I didn't keep you waiting," Marcus said, settling into the chair across from her. "Not at all." Lucia closed her book, revealing its cover, a collection of Pablo Neruda's poetry. "I always come early with a book. Old teacher habits." The morning sunlight filtering through the window caught the amber highlights in her eyes, and Marcus found himself momentarily lost for words. A young waitress approached their table, saving him from the silence. "What can I get you folks?" she asked, pen poised over her notepad. "Coffee, black," Marcus said. "And?" He glanced at the display case. "One of those blueberry scones, please." "Make that 2 coffees," Lucia added. "But I'll take mine with just a splash of cream. And yes to the scone, they're wonderful here." When the waitress left, a comfortable quiet settled between them. Marcus gestured to her book. "Neruda? I remember teaching Tonight I Can Write to my linguistics students, years ago." Lucia's eyes lit up. "You taught Neruda? In Spanish?" "In Spanish and English," Marcus explained, his voice warm with memory. "We compared translations, discussed how certain emotions carry differently across languages. The students were fascinated by how La noche está estrellada becomes something entirely new in English. The night is starry," Lucia translated softly. "It loses something, doesn't it? The music of it." Their coffees arrived, steam curling up between them. Marcus wrapped his hands around the warm mug, enjoying how easily the conversation flowed. "Jada mentioned you've been helping her with pronunciation for her Spanish class," Lucia said, stirring a touch of cream into her coffee. "She has a wonderful ear for language." Marcus smiled, pride evident in his expression. "She gets that from her mother. Sarah could pick up accents like breathing. She used to joke that between the two of us, Our daughter was destined to be a polyglot. He paused, realizing this was the first time he'd mentioned Sarah so naturally in conversation with someone new. But Lucia's face showed only gentle understanding, no trace of pity or discomfort. "Tell me about her," Lucia asked softly, breaking off a piece of her scone. Marcus took a thoughtful sip of coffee. She was a music teacher, piano mainly. She believed music was its own kind of language, one that crossed all borders. When she got sick, she kept teaching from home as long as she could. Her students would come to our living room, and even on her worst days, she'd light up when they played. Lucia reached across the table, briefly touching his hand. The gesture was simple, but full of warmth. "She sounds remarkable." She was, Marcus agreed. She would have loved seeing Jada perform at the scholarship concert. Music was their special connection. "And what about you?" Lucia asked, her tone gentler now. "What languages speak to your heart?" Marcus broke into a soft chuckle. "That's a beautiful way to put it, I suppose. Greek, oddly enough. There's something about its precision, how it can capture complex ideas in single words. But Spanish," he smiled at her. "Spanish reminds me of my grandmother's kitchen, of stories told over long Sunday afternoons." "Ah, sobremesa." Lucia nodded, using the Spanish word for lingering at the table after a meal. "My family still does that every weekend. Hours of coffee and conversation, nobody wanting to be the first to leave." "Exactly," Marcus said. "Some things just don't translate directly. You have to feel them." They fell into an easy rhythm of sharing stories. Lucia about growing up between cultures in New Mexico, Marcus about his journey from academia to custodial work. Their laughter mingled with the cafe's quiet buzz of conversation and clinking cups. "You know," Lucia said, "when you first translated that plaque in the hall, I knew right away you weren't just reading words. You understood the heart behind them." Marcus nodded, remembering that pivotal moment. "Languages have always been more than just grammar to me. They're bridges between people, between worlds." "Is that why you stayed?" Lucia asked. "At Hawthorne, I mean, even before all this change?" Marcus considered her question carefully. "Partly, but mostly for Jada. Every parent wants to give their child a better path. And now," he gestured to encompass everything that had happened. "Now, it feels like more than that. Like maybe all those languages were preparing me for a different kind of translation. Between communities," Lucia finished his thought. "Between the seen and unseen work that holds a place together." "Exactly." Marcus checked his watch and was surprised to find nearly 2 hours had passed. Their coffee cups were empty, scone crumbs scattered on their plates. Lucia noticed too, gathering her book and shoulder bag. "I should get going. I promised to help my sister with her garden this afternoon." Marcus stood, suddenly reluctant for their time to end. "This was nice," he said, then added more boldly, "Maybe we could do it again?" Lucia's smile brightened her whole face. "I'd like that very much." They walked together to the cafe's door, stepping out into the crisp autumn air. The morning sun had grown stronger, painting Main Street in shades of gold and amber. Fallen leaves skittered past their feet in the gentle breeze. They stood there for a moment, side by side on the sidewalk, neither quite ready to turn away. A perfect autumn day stretched before them, full of possibility. The heavy doors of Founders Hall creaked open as Marcus stepped inside, his mop and bucket echoing against the marble floors. The grand space lay quiet now, a stark contrast to the jubilant celebration that had filled it hours before. Moonlight streamed through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the floor, where hundreds of feet had tracked in autumn leaves and dirt throughout the day. Marcus breathed in deeply, savoring the peaceful solitude. He didn't have to be here, the evening cleaning crew could handle it. But something drew him to this moment, this place, this simple task that had become so much more than just cleaning floors. He dipped his mop into the warm water, the soft splashing sound filling the empty hall. The familiar scent of lemon cleaner rose up as he began his methodical pattern across the marble surface. left to right, back and forth, a rhythm he knew by heart. His muscles moved with practiced ease, finding comfort in the routine that had carried him through so many quiet evenings. "Thank you, Lord," he whispered, his voice barely audible in the vast space. He thought about all that had changed since that day Cole had challenged him to translate the plaque. The memory no longer stung. Instead, it felt like the first step on an unexpected journey. As he worked his way down the hall, Marcus's mind wandered to Jada's violin performance earlier that day. The pride in her eyes when she finished her piece, the standing ovation, the way Eleanor had dabbed at her tears with a handkerchief. His daughter was blooming here, finding her place in a world that was finally opening its doors wider. The moonlight shifted as clouds passed overhead, creating dancing patterns on the wet floor. Marcus paused to wring out his mop, remembering how he used to hurry through his evening cleaning, rushing to get home. Now each stroke felt like a meditation, a quiet act of dignity that spoke louder than words. He reached the spot where he had delivered his speech during Founders Day. The podium was gone, but he could still feel the weight of that moment. The faces in the crowd, the tension breaking into understanding, the sound of applause that had nothing to do with pity and everything to do with respect. Water dripped from his mop as he cleaned around the new plaque on the wall, the one announcing the Hands Minds Fellowship. His own name was there, listed as Community Liaison. But it was the other names that made him smile. The kitchen staff, groundskeepers, and custodians who would finally have chances to grow, to learn, to be seen as whole people. The work was methodical but not mindless. Each stroke of the mop was intentional, each section of floor given proper attention. Marcus had learned long ago that there was honor in doing things right, even when, especially when, no one was watching. His wife had taught him that, during those long nights in the hospital when he'd helped the nurses keep her room clean, making sure she had dignity until the end. He hummed softly as he worked, an old gospel tune his mother used to sing. The sound carried in the empty hall a gentle accompaniment to the swish of his mop across the floor. The tune reminded him of Sunday mornings, of faith that had carried him through dark times, of hope that kept pushing him forward. Near the entrance, he noticed a small scatter of dried leaves that had blown in during the day. Marcus set down his mop and knelt to pick them up by hand, feeling their crisp edges. Such a small thing, but it mattered. Everything mattered when you were helping to create a space where people could learn, grow, and find their way. The floor began to dry behind him, the marble taking on a soft sheen in the moonlight. Marcus worked steadily, each section becoming a mirror-like surface that reflected the architectural details above. The carved woodwork, the elegant arches, the history embedded in every corner. He thought about Lucia, about their coffee date planned for tomorrow morning, about how her eyes lit up when she talked about language and culture, about the gentle way she listened to others' stories. Another gift he hadn't expected, another reminder that life could surprise you with joy when you least expected it. The bucket's water had grown dirty. Marcus wheeled it to the utility sink in the corner, dumped it out, and mixed fresh solution. The clean water sparkled in the moonlight as he rolled back to finish the last section of floor. He could smell the lemon scent rising again, fresh and sharp in the quiet air. As he made his final passes with the mop, Marcus felt a deep sense of contentment settle over him. This wasn't just about clean floors, it was about creating space for transformation. Every person who walked through these halls tomorrow would see their reflection in this shine, would feel the care that went into maintaining this place of learning. Setting his mop aside, Marcus stepped back to survey his work. The entire hall gleamed in the moonlight, each tile reflecting light like a mirror. He stood still, looking down at his reflection in the polished marble. Golden sunlight streamed through the chapel's stained glass windows, painting the wooden pews in warm autumn colors. The familiar space had been transformed, with long tables stretching down the center aisle where the usual rows of seats would be. The air carried the mingled scents of roasted turkey, fresh bread, and Eleanor's famous apple pie. Marcus stood near the entrance, greeting people as they arrived for the community Thanksgiving meal. He wore a crisp white shirt with rolled-up sleeves and his Sunday tie, the one Jada had given him last Christmas. The warmth in his eyes matched the welcoming smile on his face as he directed families to empty seats. "Happy Thanksgiving, Mr. Reed," called out Mrs. Quote. Chen from the corner store, her arms full of steaming containers. "I brought my mother's dumplings. Everyone loved them last year." "Thank you, Mrs. Chen. I've been looking forward to those all week," Marcus replied, taking the containers from her and guiding her to the serving table. The chapel buzzed with cheerful conversation as more townspeople arrived. Children darted between tables while their parents caught up with neighbors. Marcus spotted Cole helping an elderly man with his coat and nodded approvingly. The boy had changed these past months, his community service hours evolving into genuine care for others. Eleanor bustled about in her element, orchestrating the dessert table with military precision. Her silver hair caught the light as she arranged pies, cakes, and cookies in neat rows. "Marcus, dear," she called out, "could you help me move this table just a bit to the left? We need more room for the Johnson family's contributions." As Marcus adjusted the table, Eleanor patted his arm. "Look at this gathering," she whispered. "When I started this tradition 15 years ago, we barely filled 3 pews. Now look, we've got the whole town here." Indeed, the chapel was filling quickly. Teachers chatted with custodial staff, business owners mingled with day laborers, and children from different neighborhoods played together without hesitation. The divisions that had once seemed so rigid were softening, like butter on warm bread. Lucia appeared at Marcus's side, carrying a folder of papers. She wore a deep red sweater that complemented her dark hair, and Marcus couldn't help but notice how her eyes sparkled when she smiled at him. "I've been practicing the poem," she said, touching his arm lightly, "though I'm a bit nervous about reading in front of everyone." "You'll do beautifully," Marcus assured her. Their relationship had grown naturally over these past months, built on shared books and quiet conversations over coffee. They moved at their own pace, both understanding the value of careful steps. A familiar melody floated through the air as Jada began warming up her violin near the altar. She'd grown more confident since winning the scholarship, her music reaching new depths of expression. Marcus watched proudly as she adjusted her sheet music, remembered how far they'd come since those uncertain days. "Time to start serving," Eleanor announced, clapping her hands. Marcus joined the line of volunteers behind the serving tables, donning an apron and taking his place beside the mashed potatoes. The smell of sage and butter wafted up as he lifted the serving spoon. The line of people moved steadily, plates being filled with turkey, stuffing, green beans, and all the traditional fixings. Marcus made sure every portion was generous, especially for the children. He recognized faces from all corners of town, the night shift workers from the hospital, small business owners, teachers from both public and private schools, and even Dean Halstead, who now worked across town but had accepted the community's invitation. Halfway through serving, Jada began to play. Her violin sang out clear and sweet, filling the chapel with "Amazing Grace." The familiar hymn touched something deep in Marcus's heart as he continued serving, watching people pause in their conversations to listen. When everyone had been served, Lucia stood to read her poem. Her voice, steady and warm, carried through the space as she shared verses about gratitude, community, and hope. Marcus noticed how the children sat still, caught by the rhythm of her words, and how the adults nodded in recognition of the truths she spoke. Eleanor's dessert table became the center of attention after the main meal. She knew every pie's story, whose grandmother's recipe, which apples came from which orchard, who had learned to bake just for this occasion. She served each piece with a story and a smile, building connections one slice at a time. Marcus moved between tables, refilling water glasses and collecting empty plates. He paused to help young mothers cut meat for their children, to steady elderly hands with heavy dishes, to share a joke with teenagers who once would have ignored him. Each interaction felt like a small blessing, a tiny thread in the tapestry of community they were weaving together. The afternoon light began to soften, casting long shadows through the windows. Children had grown quiet, sleepy from full bellies and warm fellowship. Adults lingered over coffee and pie, reluctant to end this moment of peace. Jada played softer pieces now, her music a gentle backdrop to the contentment in the room. Marcus found himself standing still for a moment, taking in the scene before him. Here was Eleanor, showing a young girl how to serve pie without breaking the crust. There was Lucia, deep in conversation with a group of parents about bilingual education. Cole sat with his father, both of them looking more at ease than Marcus had ever seen them. And there was Jada, his beautiful daughter, her bow moving smoothly across the strings as she played from her heart. She caught his eye and smiled, never missing a note. The pride and love that swelled in Marcus's chest nearly overwhelmed him. In this moment, surrounded by the warmth of true community, Marcus bowed his head slightly. His heart lifted in silent thanksgiving, not just for the food that filled their bellies, but for the healing that had filled their souls. For the bridges built, the walls fallen, the hearts opened. For second chances and new beginnings, for the simple dignity of work and the profound power of love. The music continued to flow, weaving through the conversations and laughter, binding them all together in this sacred space. Marcus stood among his neighbors, no longer the janitor, no longer the outsider, but simply one thread in the beautiful fabric of their shared life. He looked around at these faces he had come to know so well. Eleanor's gentle wisdom, Lucia's quiet strength, his daughter's radiant spirit, and all the others who had become part of their story. In the peaceful quiet of his heart, Marcus offered up his thanks, knowing that sometimes the greatest blessings come wrapped in the simplest moments of grace. Marcus pulled his coat tighter as he and Jada stepped out of their apartment into the swirling snow. The white flakes danced in the streetlight, coating everything in a pristine blanket that muffled the usual morning sounds. Their boots crunched in the fresh powder as they made their way toward Hawthorne Academy for Jada's early violin practice. "Remember when you used to hate getting up this early?" Marcus asked, watching his breath form little clouds in the cold air. Jada adjusted her violin case strap and grinned. "That was before I had something worth getting up for." She reached out to catch snowflakes on her mittened hand. "Besides, everything looks magical in the snow." Marcus nodded, taking in the transformed landscape. The familiar route to school looked different today. Trees wearing heavy white coats and fences topped with pure white caps. Even the old brick buildings seemed softer, gentler under their dusting of snow. "You know what else is magical?" Jada asked, a mischievous glint in her eye. Before Marcus could respond, a loosely packed snowball hit his shoulder with a soft puff. "Oh, so that's how it is?" Marcus laughed, already bending to scoop up his own handful of snow. Jada shrieked and ducked behind a tree, carefully setting down her violin case first. Their impromptu snowball fight lasted only a minute. They still had practice to get to, but their laughter echoed off the buildings. Marcus couldn't remember the last time they'd played like this, just father and daughter, without worry weighing them down. As they resumed walking, Jada linked her arm through his. "Everything's different now, isn't it, Dad? Good different." Marcus squeezed her arm gently. "Sure is, baby girl. Though some things haven't changed at all." He glanced at her violin case. "You still practice just as hard as ever." "But now I'm practicing for something real," Jada said. "The scholarship concerts, the spring recital, it all means something more now." They passed the spot where the donor's plaque had caused such a stir months ago. Marcus remembered the tension of that day, how one small moment had sparked such big changes. Sometimes the smallest things can shift everything, he mused. "Like you standing up for yourself?" Jada asked softly. "That wasn't small, Dad. That was huge." Marcus felt warmth spread through his chest despite the cold. "I stood up for what was right, for dignity, for you. And look what happened." Jada gestured at the school building coming into view. "You're not just the janitor anymore. You're helping make real changes. People respect you like they should have all along." "The job title was never what mattered," Marcus reminded her. It was about doing honest work with integrity. I know, Jada nodded. But now other people see it too, and I get to see you happy. They paused at the bottom of the school steps, where Marcus would normally have headed to the service entrance in the past. Now he used the main doors just like everyone else, his new position as community liaison having literally opened new doors for him. Speaking of happy, Marcus said, brushing snow from Jada's coat, how about we finally hang that photo when we get home? The one from Founders Day? Jada's face lit up. Really? I thought you were still being shy about it. Not shy, Marcus corrected. Just taking time to get used to it. But it's part of our story now. Might as well put it on display. They climbed the steps together, stamping snow from their boots. Inside, the halls were quiet this early, their footsteps echoing on the marble floors Marcus had mopped so many times. Now other hands kept them gleaming, though he still picked up a mop sometimes when he wanted to think. You know what else is different? Jada asked, as they headed toward the music room. The way you look at Ms. Alvarez. Marcus tried to keep his face neutral, but he couldn't help smiling. Is that right? Mm-hmm. And the way she looks at you too. Jada bumped his shoulder playfully. I like it. She makes you happy. She does, Marcus admitted. But you're still my number one girl. I better be, Jada laughed, then grew serious. I'm just glad we're both finding our place here, really finding it, not just existing. They reached the music room, where warm lights spilled out into the hallway. Through the window, they could see other students already warming up their instruments, Eleanor arranging sheet music at the piano. The scene looked like a painting, framed by snow-covered windows. Go on in, Marcus said. I'll pick you up after practice and we'll hang that photo. Jada hugged him quickly, then slipped into the room. Marcus watched through the window as she unpacked her violin, greeting her fellow musicians with easy confidence. She looked so at home there, so sure of herself and her place in the world. Later that evening, they stood in their living room, Marcus holding the framed photograph while Jada directed him on placement. The photo captured the moment right after his Founders Day speech. Marcus at the podium, face bright with emotion, Jada hugging him from one side while Eleanor and Lucia stood nearby. All of them caught in a moment of pure joy. A little to the left, Jada instructed. There, perfect. Marcus stepped back to look at the photo, now hanging prominently on their wall. It wasn't just a picture, it was a milestone, marking the point where everything had shifted into something better, something truer. You were right earlier, he said quietly. Everything is different now, but you know what stayed exactly the same? Jada leaned against his shoulder, both of them looking at the photo. What's that? How proud I am to be your father. That's never changed, not for one single second. The snow continued falling outside their windows, adding another layer of quiet beauty to the world. But inside, in their warm apartment with their memories newly displayed on the wall, father and daughter stood together in comfortable silence, watching the past and present merge into something beautiful. Marcus's footsteps echoed through the empty corridors of Founders Hall in the early morning quiet. The building held a different energy at this hour, peaceful, expectant, like a cathedral before service. Shafts of dawn light pierced through the high windows, dust motes dancing in their beams. He could have delegated this task. As community liaison, he had that authority now, but some mornings, like this one, called him back to the simple meditation of mop and bucket. Not because he had to, but because he chose to. The worn wooden handle felt familiar in his hands as he wheeled his cleaning cart to the center of the vast hall. The marble floors stretched out before him, already clean from the night crew's work, but Marcus saw possibility in its surface. Each stroke of the mop could make it shine brighter, each careful movement a testament to work done with purpose. He paused by the east wall, where the morning sun streamed through the great stained glass window. The colored light washed over him, blues, reds, and golds painting his dark skin in jeweled tones. Marcus closed his eyes, feeling the warmth on his face. Thank you, Lord, he whispered, his voice barely disturbing the sacred quiet, for showing me that every task can be holy when done with love." The prayer came naturally now, unlike the days when he'd struggled to find gratitude in his work. Back then, he'd felt invisible, his worth measured only in clean floors and empty trash bins. Now he understood that dignity wasn't given by others, it came from within, from knowing that all labor had value when performed with excellence. Marcus dipped his mop in the bucket, the water's surface rippling with reflected color from the windows above. He began his familiar pattern across the floor, each stroke deliberate and sure. The marble responded to his care, developing a soft sheen that deepened with every pass. Memories rose with the rhythm of his work. Here, where he now stood, Cole had once mocked him with that donor's plaque. Marcus smiled slightly, remembering how that moment of challenge had become a turning point. Now Cole helped coordinate student volunteer programs, learning that service shaped character more than status ever could. Near the grand staircase, he'd first spoken with Lucia beyond simple greetings. Their coffee dates had become regular now, their conversations flowing easily between English and Spanish, between past hurts and future hopes. She understood what it meant to live between worlds, to translate not just words but whole ways of being. The morning light shifted as he worked, the stained glass colors moving across the floor like slow waves. Marcus moved with them, his movements almost musical in their flow. He thought of Jada's violin practice, how she approached each piece with the same careful attention he gave to his mopping. Different instruments, same dedication. The marble beneath his mop began to mirror the ceiling's elaborate scrollwork, creating a double image that made the hall seem twice as vast. In that reflection, Marcus caught glimpses of himself, no longer stooped or hurrying, but standing tall, moving with quiet pride. The image rippled and reformed with each stroke: scholar, father, teacher, servant, leader. All true, all part of his whole self. He reached the center of the hall, where he delivered his Founders' Day speech. The words came back to him, about dignity transcending title, about how true education meant learning to see the worth in all work and all people. The marble here seemed to hold echoes of that day's applause, of tears and reconciliation, of a community choosing to grow beyond old prejudices. Sunlight poured stronger now through the stained glass, creating a kaleidoscope of color that surrounded Marcus as he worked. Each hue seemed to carry meaning: the blue of wisdom hard-won, the red of courage tested and proven, the gold of dawn after long darkness. The light painted his work clothes in royal colors, transforming the ordinary into something luminous. His mop traced careful circles on the floor, each pass revealing deeper layers of shine. This was more than cleaning, no, it was craftsmanship, meditation, prayer in motion. Every stroke declared that work done with excellence was its own kind of poetry, its own form of praise. The hall's acoustics carried the soft swish of his mop like whispered verses. Marcus hummed low, a gospel tune his wife had loved, letting the familiar melody blend with the rhythm of his work. The music seemed to rise from the floor itself, a harmony of labor and love, of past and present meeting in this quiet moment. As he worked his way toward the hall's far end, the morning light followed, wrapping him in its colored embrace. Through the windows, he could see students beginning to arrive, their distant figures moving with purpose toward their day's learning. Soon these halls would fill with voices and footsteps, with questions and discoveries. But for now, in this suspended moment between night and day, Marcus moved in solitude through his cathedral of light and marble. His reflection rippled across the polished floor, a man transformed, not by changing his work, but by changing how he saw it. Each movement precise, each stroke intentional, he continued his dance with mop and light, creating order and beauty in the quiet morning hours. Not because he must, but because he could, because excellence was its own reward, because some translations needed no words at all. The stained glass colors shifted and flowed around him as he worked, painting him in light that seemed to come from within as much as without. In the gleaming marble below, his reflection moved with quiet dignity, each gesture an affirmation of work's inherent worth, each careful stroke a testament to hope made visible through faithful service. What would you do if you were in their place? Comment your answer below, and let's see how you'd rewrite the ending. If you thought this was just the beginning, you're right. Click through and see where the story takes you next. If you enjoyed the story of Marcus Reed, I handpicked the next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.